Hi, this is Rob Sheen from the Source Conference, and I'm here with Anand Srinivas, who is the CTO and co-founder of Nyansa. And he's going to be giving a talk at Source Boston next week on the wild, wild west of IoT security in the enterprise. So lots to unpack there. So Anand, why don't you tell us a little bit about your talk?
Yeah, for sure. So it comes from being part of a company, Nyansa, that we look at a lot of client devices in a lot of enterprise networks. And so different verticals, there's education, so in universities, there's healthcare networks, there's manufacturing networks, there's distribution warehouse networks, and other retail networks as well. And as we sort of look at all these devices, and we're looking at more than 20 million client devices, most of these devices are your plain vanilla, iPhones, Android phones, Windows, laptops and whatever else. But a growing number of these are these sort of are IoT devices. And when we think of IoT devices, a lot of the times we think about the critical ones. And obviously these are the most important ones. So you think about in healthcare, infusion pumps, EKG machines, vital signs monitors, glucometers, whatever have you, telemedicine robots, those robots that kind of move around with the person's face on them or whatever it is, right? All of these things are networked and all of these things are critical, right? If you think about manufacturing, you think about handheld tools like the torque wrenches that sort of, tighten bolts that have to be network connected. You think about the robots that are on the assembly line. You think about, the autonomous guided vehicles that are transporting things around the area. Again, devices you don't necessarily expect, but they exist in all of these environments, and these are critical again. And then, other examples in retail, for instance, or distribution warehouse, you think of barcode scanners. So in all those really big distribution centers, if your barcode scanners are critical there in order to be able to stock the shelves or get products in and out of those areas. Again, network connected. There are pickers, these like vehicles that sort of run, back and forth. Those are also network connected and critical and so on. And just even in universities and enterprises, you see more smart lights, smart HVAC systems, and so on. And these are critical. But then you turn around and you say, okay, well, wait a minute. Are those all the IoT devices that are on, people's networks? And you come to find that's not the case at all, right? There are those kind of devices, and those are super interesting, but there's also things like photo frames connecting to the network. You'd be shocked at the number of cars that connect to sort of secure enterprise network, like Teslas or Hondas or Fords or whatever have you. One of the most odd devices that I've seen in both an enterprise as well as a university environment is a device called a love box. So this is a device that I had to look it up after the fact, but it's a device, it's internet connected. I think it came out close to Valentine's Day. And basically you text someone like a love note or like a love message or whatever. And when you do it, the box starts spinning. And then you sort of open up the box and you kind of see the message on the other side. And again, I mean, everything is getting connected. Everything is sort of like on the network nowadays. And this is all fine and dandy, and this is only going to get crazier. But the thing you got to watch out for is, what are these properly secured? Are they on the right networks? They better not be sharing the same network as my EKG machine, for instance, right? And just, what I want to talk about at Source is sort of the experience of seeing all of these different devices in different environments, and what kind of, things that you never would have expected, both in terms of the device types themselves as well as their security posture, in terms of where they are, what they're doing, and so on. So that's, hopefully that gives gives you kind of an idea.
Got it. Yeah, sounds like you've seen a whole wide variety of all the different kinds of things that can be on the network. Some very serious, some kind of, banal, like the love box and things like that. But
Exactly.
in a world where we're kind of generally all on the network all the time, that is kind of, it does become pretty risky when some of those things might be compromised. And like, pretty sure the Love Box probably didn't get a pen test before it went live, right? So how do you kind of differentiate between like the critical things and not, but even for the things that technically aren't, how do you maybe discourage people from either putting those on there or making sure that they're on a safer part of the network?
Yeah, I think the good news is for the most part, people have these on guest networks and
Hmm.
sort of guest VLANs and sort of, separated out from everything out there. So that's the good news. But I think, you do see some surprising instances where they are on networks. Or for instance, so the way we kind of look at it is the reason you should be interested in both critical and non-critical devices is you don't want a critical device on an unsecure network. So we've seen, like, I don't know, luminometers or actually even in one environment, we did see an EKG machine on a guest network, on a non-secured network. That's super useful to know because obviously there are things like the Love Box that can be on the guest network. And then by the same token, you don't want to see things like, a car or an Xbox or anything like this, which wouldn't be critical necessarily, um, on sort of a secure network where sort of it can be used for nefarious or not even used for nefarious reasons or anything like that. It's just that it's just not good policy to have sort of non-critical devices on critical networks. It's best to keep these things segmented.
Sure, sure. So
Yeah.
the segment. So let's riff off the segmenting thing for a second, because
Go
I
ahead.
have seen in a lot of cases, especially in say healthcare environments, the
Yep.
network tends to be open and flat, at least inside. So
Yep.
there's a tendency there to trust things on the inside, even though we all kind of know that that's probably not the smartest thing because once you're in, and it's not that hard to
Yep.
get in. So how do we
Definitely.
kind of shift that mindset so that things like EKG monitors are actually on a secured network? Where do we start?
Yeah, I mean, it starts with, VLANs and SSIDs, your basic sort of unit of segmentation in the network, and sort of making sure that from that basic segmentation perspective, these things, if you sort of dive into a specific VLAN where you're sort of enforcing ACLs at the router, that you have the devices that are on that VLAN sort of share the right level of security that's sort of desired. Or, for wireless devices, a lot of this stuff happens at the SSID level, where on an SSID basis, you sort of enforce policy and just make sure that that's proper. Then there's kind of the graduate school level of stuff where you get into software-defined networking and microsegmentation, right? Where you can now say, well, this group of devices, regardless, I want to create sort of an overlay network, which kind of has all the security policy and all the sort of requirements that I want. And I'm going to sort of create these groups and leave it up to my software-defined network to do the microsegmentation for me using overlays as opposed to using basic things like SSIDs and VLANs. And definitely that's where sort of the industry is trending
Mm-hmm.
in terms of where everybody wants to get to, because it's the most flexible and most general way to sort of do these things. But what I've seen sort of in practice is let's get the undergrad level done stuff done first.
Right.
Make sure
Well,
that's good.
yeah.
So
So
yeah.
so that kind of covers the technical aspects of it, though.
Yeah.
But how do you convince management to actually do it? Because especially in the healthcare environment, they tend to focus on functionality. So like,
Yeah.
does it work or does it not work? And that the doctors certainly don't care if it's on a secure network or not necessarily, unless they have a reason to. How do we kind of move that needle so it's actually getting pushed by management at the right in the right times?
So it's a really good point. I think the first step there is to even just shine a light on it. So if you went to a just an arbitrary IT department or a security department and you asked them the question, tell me every single IoT device that's on your network, right? On the corporate or the either the corporate or the secure or whatever it is, and you just ask the question. I almost guarantee you that most departments wouldn't be able to answer that question. Or they would have ideas. They would say, I think,
Mm-hmm.
there's these devices or whatever it is. And I think there are this many of them, but I'm not 100% sure. right?
Right.
And so really the first step and one of the most interesting aspects of even going to a customer environment and sort of turning on the solution is just the aspect of, hey, let's just look at this SSID. Did you know that these things were on this SSID? Or did you even know that these things were on this VLAN? And that customer where we saw the EKG machine on an unsecure network, I mean, when they saw that, they fixed it. They got that device sort of off that network very quickly. But they just had no idea. They just didn't even know, right? And
Right.
so I think that's clearly the first step of all of this, which is shining a light on it and sort of exposing the fact that there are these potential policy violations. Part of this is in certain industries, there's also compliance aspects to this as well,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like in healthcare, kind of sticking to that example, there's HIPAA compliance, where you can't have patient data on an unsecure network or whatever have you, and that creates other kinds of problems,
Right.
right? And so so that's I think that's probably the first step, just to shine a light on it and have that.
Got it. So maybe shifting focus from to the implementers of it to the manufacturers of it.
Yeah.
A lot of these things um, can't even really be patched, or they're running on really old operating systems. And if you upgrade the operating system, you might actually break the device. And
Yeah.
how do we maybe shift the mindset of the manufacturers a little bit to get them maybe a little focus on features and functionality, and a little bit more focused on security? Or is that just kind of a crazy thing to even ask for?
I think that just might be a pipe dream because obviously, the main the makers of the love box, just as an example, their
Right.
use cases to sell, Valentine's Day happiness, I guess, right?
I was thinking more in the
Yeah.
lines of the EKG manufacturers than the love box
Yeah.
manufacturers.
No, fair enough. Yeah, so for the non-critical stuff, yeah, exactly. That's totally going to be a pipe dream. For the EKG machines, for the infusion pumps, for the barcode scanners, and so on, I think even there, it's tough because that's not where they make their money, right? Like Honeywell selling barcode scanners, isn't focused on security and networking or anything like that. They're focused on, okay, well, how do we be able to scan these packages and get that data out as fast as possible? And, how do we sell as many of these things as possible, right? As quickly as possible. And, do we really need to hire security engineers for that or networking engineers? Probably not, right? Do we want to buy the most, do we want to buy a Cisco networking chipset so that the networking is all secure? Do we want to buy a super secure chipset, which costs, 20x the amount of, let's say, like the cheapest possible chipset? Probably not, right? I mean, let's just buy the cheapest thing and make as much profit on what we're trying to sell as possible. So I think, what we've seen in general, which is actually, we see things both from a security standpoint and a performance standpoint. And what's been super interesting is it's not as though these devices perform very well either on the network. Right? These devices have the most quirky behavior. They drop off the network, right? They do sort of random things which affects like other devices as well. But it all stems back to the same problem, which is just that the manufacturers of these devices, they make money by selling the device to the line of business, and they're trying to solve a very specific line of business problem. They're not, selling it because it's the most secure device and the most network, the best networking, device, right? And so this sort of gets us to, that aspect of, with IoT security, it's hard to rely on the vendors, and for that matter, it's even hard to rely on the consumers spending more money buying products that have better networking or security chipsets or software stacks, right? Because even as a consumer, I want to just buy the cheapest thing, right? Because that's what I need to solve. So,
Right.
that's kind of what flips IoT security a little on its head, which is that you almost have an expectation that the security and the networking is going to be really bad. And so you have to sort of work around that and kind of mitigate that a little bit after the fact by looking at what these things are actually doing on the network and trying to sort of adjust to what they're doing, as
Right.
opposed to sort of being able to rely on the source. No pun intended.
Fair enough. So it sounds like we're kind of stuck at that point where, as the enterprise consumers of this gear, we're probably better off just making the assumption that it's flawed and then building walls around it and kind of segmenting it off so that it can't affect anything else when it
Yep.
fails, not if it's, fails.
I think so. I mean, here's another example of something that we found recently. We found, what looks to be like a zero-day vulnerability with a certain device in a critical environment. And what's probably happening is it's not the device manufacturer that's necessarily at fault. It's the supply chain down the road,
Mm.
right? So it's not like they manufacture everything in their headquarters or anything like that. They have to get parts from, wherever you have to get parts from. And those people you get parts from, they have to get parts from other places as well, and software and drivers and whatever else.
Mm-hmm.
And in that supply chain somewhere, there could be a problem. So even if you trust implicitly the manufacturer, maybe down the road in the supply chain, there's something going on. And so I think it's probably a safe bet to just always assume that these things are, could be problematic and sort of go with that. Yeah.
Right. Yep, that sounds like good stuff. So, all right, well, definitely looking forward to hearing about your talk. And the talk is the Wild Wild West of IoT Security in the Enterprise, and it's going to be next week. And you're speaking on looks like Thursday. So
looking forward to it, man.
All right, cool. So we'll see you there. And for those that want to continue the conversation on IoT with Anand, definitely stop by the conference, and we'll continue it from there.
For sure. Thanks, Rob.
All right, thanks a lot, Anand.